So why a town hall? It kind of began with this conversation.
Yesterday when I found out that they were having protests, I was like, okay, I'm going to go, show my support. But this was before everything got really, uh, it was already bad, but this was before things got violent in downtown.
We wanted to do something, but this moment was new to everyone and we weren't sure where to begin. Well, it actually began with the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage, the unjust hangings of slaves, the Civil War, Jim Crow, led into the Civil Rights Movement, the murders of Emmett Till, and the modern day lynchings of Trayvon Martin, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and a host of others. But then there was this. Wait a minute, rewind that back? Is this a photo op in the middle of a protest about police brutality? Alright, I'm done. We took to the streets to engage in real protests and started cleaning up our community. But something was still missing. We needed people to feel our anger and know our pain, to make our own call for justice, and to set an example for the kids coming up behind us. So we came here so that you can hear our voices and know we will no longer be silent.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome all the panelists that were able to be with us today. And I'm just going to go in order of the folks on my screen. So thank you, Miriam and Laura, for being here. We're excited to hear your voices this morning. Brother Anthony, we're excited to hear from you this morning. Thank you for being here. Miss Alexis, it's good to see you. Ndidi, it's exciting to have you in the house as well. And Jerona, glad we were able to work out some of those technical issues and have you in the house with us this morning. And Miss Jenny Serrano, who I know is not too excited because she's having some issues with sound on her end. And so we're trying to work through that as we are live right now. But we also want to welcome in Brother Dr. Akin Abioye into this conversation this morning. So I just want to give some context as to how we got here. As many of you all know, Peace for Kids really believes in anchoring itself around the youth voice and the youth experience. And so, to be honest, I was in a moment of privilege when all of this happened. And I was getting calls from our young people who wanted to engage in protest. And, I recognized at that moment that I didn't have the capacity to go out in the street to engage with them in the way that they wanted to. And so we started a kind of protest channel that came out of a conversation that we had last Saturday. And in that protest channel, we decided that we were going to go out to have an experience at a rally. And the rally that we went to was organized by some old traditional kind of civil rights activist groups, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, as well as Baptist clergy and ministers. And when we went there, the young adults that came were a little frustrated with the process because they felt like it had been staged and they didn't feel like it was representative of their voice. And they felt like they wanted to have a space where their voices could really be heard and articulated. So that's why we are here today. And we decided not only having the young people on, but ensuring that we included the voices of folks who had a lived experience in care, because we get that this is an intergenerational experience that goes just beyond the youth experience. So we've got a good mix of young people and folks who have had more life experience. I won't say that we are the elders, but folks who have more life experience. And my job is in this to just moderate. So I will not in any way engage in this conversation in terms of giving my insight, because this is not my experience. It is the experience of the folks who are here. So that is what we're going to do. So the first thing that I want to kind of hear from the group is I'd love to know how you are all feeling at the moment. Do you all feel like this is just another business as usual moment where folks are angry and then we're going to return to the way things were before? And since it was kind of Anthony who initiated us in this conversation, I'd like for Anthony, if he's ready, to answer how he's feeling in this moment about what's going on.
I'm tired. Like, I'm not even tired. Doesn't even start to explain it. I'm just like exhausted. I'm just emotionally and physically just drained. I don't think that I don't think that this is something that just, business as usual. Because if we're in the middle of a pandemic and it's like we're fighting from our lives from a virus, and we're also fighting for our lives from police brutality and police violence. So it's honestly, I just like the news headlines and saying, we're fighting two deadly viruses at the same time, and it's just like we can only handle people can only handle so much at a time, and just like it was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and I don't think that is going to go back to business as usual.
Thanks for that perspective. And I know, Jerona, you have a unique perspective as someone who, is a mother who's experienced this on some other ends as well. So I'm curious for you if there are things that feel different about this moment.
Yeah, it especially with the youth right now, I do it the response. We can talk about 30 years ago of going through this same horrible experience to now. There definitely feels like a difference in a shift in the way people are thinking and how their hearts have been touched and what people are really feel like they're committed to action this time, which is promising because I'll admit when this first started, I thought, oh my gosh, here we go again. Not again, and it just deepened my worry even more as having a young Black man's son out there unarmed every day and what could happen. But I will say, as the protests have continued, they've grown in numbers. Um, the corporations that have spoken out in the language that they've used and what they've said and how they've committed to taking their platform and their exposure to people and having a willingness to commit to change, that feels different. That feels like, okay, maybe there's a shift this time and that we're actually going to see something happen. But I will say it is up to us to push those changes to actually manifest.
I appreciate that. Is there anyone else here who'd like to speak to that? I know, Jenny, if you're unable to hear us, that's unfortunate. So I hope you can hear us on the phone. But I'd also love to get your perspective as someone who has a different view about this moment and someone who actually works within the system. What do you see as our opportunity here? And is there anything that you feel is important for us to take away, particularly because you've also had the lived experience in care?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've grappled with a lot of stuff just in the past day since everybody sort of put it on my mind. And we had some pre-work that we did yesterday. Um, I think there's so much to say. I want to really hear from other panelists and from folks that are interacting with us via the chat. But I really I have felt in the past couple of weeks very almost paralyzed in terms of what I could do. Like Jerona said, I thought in the initial, here we go again, same thing that happened during the '92 riots that I was a teenager during, and I thought, well, wow, this is really maybe my kids' time to move, and yeah, just in the past couple of days, I think I've seen like a major shift, and so later in the conversation, I would definitely like to sort of put my policy hat on and give everyone that's participating some suggestions of what we can ask for, because for me I think that's really where my sweet spot is, and that's where I want to go, is what do we do next. What are the things that we need to do in order to mobilize and actually move some things forward and really get somewhere that we maybe haven't been able to in the past 20 years.
Thanks for that, Jenny. And I see Ndidi has her hand up, so I'm going to go to Ndidi, and then I have a question that I want to direct at Miss Alexis.
Thank you. I just sort of wanted to circle back and reiterate what Jerona and Jenny were saying. I too was a teenager when the '92 riots were happening, but I was a teenager in Canada. And so it was different. It was very much othered. And what feels very different is that this time the fight has gone onto Canadian soil. So that's really, this time it's gone very global. And I'm seeing, the youth step out more on a global scale than I saw at that time. Also, much like Jerona, I feel very, okay, hopefully this will stick. But I am a bit skeptical because yes, we've been here before, but because I'm seeing this push, I have hope. But I do know, it will be up to us to continue the momentum for better, for worse.
Yeah, and I think what's important to recognize is that in the foster care experience, folks who have been in care have had direct interaction with the police at a very early age. And so I wanted to hear from Alexis in terms of her experience with law enforcement and her perceptions around that, and also from Miriam and Laura, because I know until we understand the community interactions with police officer and what policing looks like, it's hard to talk about how we change that experience. And I fundamentally believe that foster care is one of the most foundational byproducts of a white supremacist system that extends back to, the removal of our ancestors from Alkebulan and the Middle Passage, right? There were white folks that came and removed us from our land. And so, now we're in a situation where those same officers or same entities come into homes of, our children and remove them from our community, which is an extension of, that slavery experience in which Black families were separated as a result. So I'd love to hear from Alexis and Miriam and Laura about what that experience has meant to them and their perception of law enforcement and the role they feel like it plays in their lives.
Hi, I'll start because I've never spoke about this. And I've been trying over like the last couple of days to find a word that I thought like police meant to me. And so I kind of went back within myself and thought of every interaction I ever had. But for me, when I was 9 or 8, my house was raided. I lived in a small apartment. My parents were doing, not great things. But at the time, we were having a Christmas party. So my entire family was there. And there was probably about 50, 60 police armed officers outside of my house. And I remember I walked and saw all these officers, and I closed the door because what the heck? But that was an alarm to them, and then they rushed our house. And they removed me from my mother physically because I was holding on to her, and they took her, and whatever happened. So police have always meant to me like this is the end. That was the end of my life as I knew it, or my happiness, my everything. And even now, even though I now have my parents and I still am able to be connected to my family, that still was an end to a part of my life. So now every time I encounter them, I have this fear of like, it could be the end of something. And ultimately it could be your life, like because you're Black. But that's hard because as a person you have to interact with them like you respect them, and you don't necessarily, because what they've meant to me personally has been so traumatic. So yeah, like it's just hard. I want to see them as people. I want to understand their mission. I want to say, yeah, they're removing bad people off the earth, but they don't necessarily seem to pay attention to who or how they're affecting people in the midst of that. And then, like Anthony was saying with COVID, there was a lot when COVID first came out about how, police were supposed to be a little more lax because they didn't want to arrest people and didn't want to risk the idea of infecting them. And so a lot of people in the Black community kind of not fell back a little bit, but maybe thought they wouldn't be harassed as much. But it didn't look like that. And like 2 weeks ago, I was pulled over with my friends like a block away from my house. And I was like searched. And of course, they asked me criminal questions. I just graduated from college the night before. So it was just like a huge thing, but it was like, dude, you were about to arrest me for what? And then I was going to die of a disease, and you're telling me the system is filled with COVID patients. So it's just like, it's still like, to me, I felt like the police were taking that as a way to pick on Black people still, because they don't have anything else to do.
Yeah, I hear that. Thank you for that, Alexis. It sounds like there's this interaction that you continue to have with law enforcement that you're really hoping to solve, and it feels as though this is an opportunity to kind of at least voice that opinion. And I know for Miriam and Laura, they've had similar experiences. And so I'd love to bring you all in at this point to talk about what your interaction with law enforcement has been and what your perception is of their role in our communities.
For me personally, I've always been taught to fear police officers. And before I learned that they were meant to protect me, I learned as a child that they were out to get me. And growing up in foster care and growing up as a ward of the state, I've come to understand on nearly every level how much police officers don't like children like me and don't want children like me to speak up, and how much they want children like me to be essentially forgotten. And one of my first memories was being stripped down by a police officer to check my body. And I remember turning 6 years old in foster care. And I remember every time I would see a police officer or a police car, I would immediately just go into panic and I would start sobbing uncontrollably. And I have too many memories in the back of police cars. And there are still parts of me that exist there, and that still exist in the back of police cars, in shelters, in children's hospitals, in these foster homes. And I, reflecting now and with the state of the world, I can see how our system has failed most of us and all of us. And I know now more than ever that police officers have never kept me safe, have never protected me, have terrorized us, and have hurt people that I love very dearly. And that's why I personally believe that one of the solutions to this problem and police brutality is in defunding systems that punish Black people and people of color, poor people of color. And I believe that funding belongs to our communities and should go back to our educational systems and healthcare systems. And I truly believe that we need better protectors, maybe not police officers, because police officers, like I said, have always created fear. And I think that as a community, we can begin to talk about new systems of justice that don't just punish people, but actually keep us safe.
Thank you for that. I know, that's a very difficult thing to share in terms of your history and your past. And so one thing I also want to acknowledge here is, as things are being shared and as things are coming up, if you need time, you need space to kind of recover and you want to talk to someone, I do have some folks who are open to having a conversation with you afterwards. You can have some healing, because I would be irresponsible for us to potentially open up wounds that we don't have the opportunity to heal on as a community. So please let me know, and we'll make sure that you can have those conversations. Miriam.
Hi, everyone. I'm still kind of processing what my sister just said, and I'm grateful to be a part of the community, a part of this panel, and to just be here with you all this morning. I'm just immensely grateful. To echo off of my sister, our mother was a refugee from the Civil War in El Salvador, and this is a war that the United States funded
spent billions of dollars funding, and just kind of in unpacking the history of our parents and kind of like the war zone that my mother lived in. This is all, I live in downtown LA, so kind of walking out to the National Guard is making me kind of empathize with my mother's childhood self and what she must have experienced in her home country. And for her, violence was stemmed from colonization, from Christianity, from being taught all these like different, and not that this is all like a bad thing, but the way that it presented in her life was all coming from a place of violence and torture from her parents and from the system and from churchgoers, etc. And so as a refugee at 19, she came to this country where she also was unwanted, she was undocumented. And sometimes when I reflect back on the physical abuse we experienced as children and ultimately why we ended up in the foster care system, I feel like I lived that war through her. And just as this country displaced my mother from hers, we were displaced from our parents' household as well as a product of this kind of systemic transgenerational violence. And so it's just like, it's interesting to see how, not really interesting, it's just like heartbreaking and devastating to see what imperialism does and how it directly affects different communities and even stories that we have yet to hear. And so, you know, in finding a space here and with Peace for Kids and understanding this kind of culture of separation and not having agency as a child. And like my sister mentioned, you know, when I was a kid, I heard that only bad kids went into the foster care system, and then, you know, being removed from our parents and being placed in the back of a police car and sitting on those cold plastic seats and just being separated from each other and seeing our youngest sister, who was 2 at the time, be placed in a baby seat in the back of a police car is just one of those things that you just, it plays in your mind over and over again. And it kind of plays into this notion that you are a bad kid. Bad kids go into the foster care system. Also, criminals ride in the back of police cars. So not only are you a bad child, you're also a criminal. It's kind of also like, what future are you setting up for these children in which you're setting them up for this? And this is the narrative you're providing them, and this is what you're setting them up for. And again, just tracing back to our family's history and culturally and like what happened in Latin America as well, and like how there's so many similar elements as to what we're experiencing now within the Black community and different communities, and how the state violence kind of is affecting all of us in unique ways, but also very similar ways. It's a huge call to action, especially in working with children. And I think about them all the time, and that's my, you know, like I don't go to sleep without thinking about them, and I worry about them, and I worry about the world they're growing up in. And I'm grateful for discussions like this because this gives us a space to create a safer world for the kids. Yeah, I can't change what happened to us as children, and I can't change the police raids. We can't change that, but we can do things to make it safer so that children don't have to experience that again.
I appreciate that perspective. And I see Alexis got her hand up, so I want to go back to her.
It'll be really quick. I wanted to say something because I've been hearing it a lot. Is that we've been here before, or that, you know, we're worried about the world that we're going to grow up in. And I guess because I do have the ability to be so close with a grandmother who did experience a lot of Jim Crow and being raised in the South. My grandfather was very fair-skinned and had a level of ambiguity that my grandma didn't experience. So I had to understand that. And I guess I feel like I think that we should be hopeful because the world they grew up in and the world their grandparents grew up in and the world their grandparents in isn't the world that we're in today. And, you know, we aren't, not to be like a blanket statement, but we aren't slaves anymore. So I think there is a level of progression we as our people can keep trying to strive for so that our children can be in a space where it's even if it's not a great world, it's a better world than today. And so that may mean just pushing resources back into our community so that this community feels better about its world, because we can't always do anything about like the entire world. But I feel like if I was a slave, I wouldn't want to have a child, but that was a level of hope they gave to the world, and like it created a different future for us. So like I hope that we can like be that, instead of being like this is we're never going to see any change and people are always going to be like oppressed. Yeah, that's probably true, but we can always strive for change. So
I appreciate that, Alexis, and I think that striving for change is something that is inherent in the conversation that you all are lifting up, and so been really proud of all of you, seeing you step out onto the front lines and engage in this work and activating this conversation in a unique way. And I also recognize that we have people that are not Black in the traditional sense who are engaged in this conversation with us right now. And one of the questions I've been getting a lot of is, how do I show up as an ally in this moment? And I want to go to Dr. Akin Abioye, because I know we've talked about allyship in a different context. And Dr. Akin is there with his beloved daughter, an extension of the tribe, Miss Cuba. And I'd love to get him to talk a little bit about what he believes folks who want to show up as an ally can do. And even in his categorization of what an ally is and how folks should show up. And then I'd love to hear from other folks on the panel as well. Go back to Anthony and Miriam and even Jenny to talk about, in the kind of diversity of who we are as a people, how that allyship should be showing up in this moment.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Saeed. Thanks, Alexis, Miriam, for Jenny, all shared. You know, I think, first I'll say it's like Black Lives Matter. That's the beginning of it all, right? And this idea of allyship is really interesting to me. And I always say that the first thing I started saying to people is stop asking for my advice and me to educate you for free. I paid a whole lot of cash for my education. And so stop asking for it for free, right? But that's like literally like in terms of like, if we talk about allyship, it's like, oh no, like I support Bam's business, and I'm not going to ask him to like cut my hair for free. And so, but then there's this idea of like what it means to show up, right? It's like, how can I be an ally? And I get the story of like hearing in a conversation the other day, like, oh, we went on this protest and then the police came, so we all had to go home. And it's just like, oh, well, no, the whole point, right? And is to like combat and like stand up against state sanctioned violence, right? So like the newest propaganda is like these images of like police being allies and like taking a knee with people who are protesting. And it's like, no, homie, I'm protesting you. Like, you are the problem. You don't get to feel next to me and act as though like, oh, look, I care. And it's like, literally, it's propaganda, right? Like, and so for me, I think about this idea of co-conspirator. Who with me is also going to take the fall? Who with me is willing to put their life on the line to ensure my life is safe? And I think for me, like, that's what really being in the struggle is with. I don't need allies. Like, if all you're going to do is hype me up, I'm good, right? But I think the same holds true if we think about an intersectional context, right? So, I shared with folks the other day, like the idea of being Black, right? And we're talking about like Black Lives Matter, and we're talking about that in the context of the voice that we have. Although a small percentage of the national population, our voices are loud. What about like all of the indigenous and American Indian folks and First Nation people who are murdered at a much higher rate than Black people? If you think about their, relative to their kind of population, it's like they are disproportionately slaughtered. And Black people being silent about that is just as bad as white people being silent about the murder of Black people. So if we're going to talk about being co-conspirators, it's like, no, like this civil disobedience today isn't about George Floyd. For me, it's about George Floyd and every other person of color is murdered at the hands of the police and state sanctioned, which is sanctioned by the state or the government, right? And so for me, being a co-conspirator carries far more weight. Putting your body life and limb on the line, because this is literally life and death, right? I think about we talked about this idea of policing. Every day when I go out, my wife asks me to be safe, right? And because I do not live in a paradigm wherein I respect the cops. I live in a paradigm in which the cops are agents of a system that destroys Black, brown bodies. I have no respect for that system, which means I put myself in danger when I interact with them, right? So it's like, how do we move to a paradigm where folks who are not the ones on the receiving end of an oppressive regime, a fascist police state, are willing to stand up against fascism in all its forms?
Thank you. I see Ndidi has a response, and then we'll go to Alexis. Appreciate you, Brother Akeem, and love to Cuba.
Thank you, Dr. Akeem. I very much am in support of the fact that as a mixed Black Canadian, being at the front and supporting the First Nations, Indigenous peoples has been number one. Here are some cold hard facts about Canada for everybody. Black people in Canada only make up 3.4% of the population, but we are 9% of police fatalities. The Indigenous people of Canada make up 4.8% of Canada's population. They are 15% of the police fatalities. 1/3 of all murders by police are Indigenous peoples. There was an actual law in place called the Indian Act, and that gave the police and the government of Canada the right to go into Indigenous communities, steal their children, and put them in residential homes. So the fight for the rights of Indigenous peoples in Canada is the first fight on that turf. And then it's the fight for Black bodies and Black voices. We are very, very, very interconnected. Miriam was talking about imperialism and what the U.S. sanctioned wars in Latin America have done. It's the same thing with colonization. I mean, it's all this big, very intricate and disturbing power grab that has happened by Western civilizations over Black and brown bodies. It is key that we, as Black people and people of color, make sure we're supporting all of the bodies that are under attack. I do think that in the U.S., because it's so visual, the slaughter and murders of Black bodies we're allowed a voice. That's number one that's happening. But again, constantly circling back to what's happening to the Indigenous peoples in North America is very key, because we're all being murdered and we're all being slaughtered. And so while we're focused on the micro, which is the US and what's happening, it's affecting this macro. And we can't ever forget that the fight is much bigger than just here. And I do see that happens a bit as somebody that's outside, that's only lived in the US for 5 years. I can see that there's this sort of almost tunnel vision. And sometimes I feel like I'm a part of it in the fight, and other times I feel disassociated, simply because my view of the actual paradigm and dynamic is a little bit broader. Because where I'm from, Black people in Canada, we don't have a voice. But the voice that I've ever had and been able to use, it's been to support my Indigenous brothers and sisters. Being in care, they were the highest population of children in care are First Nations. And then it's immigrant kids, of which I'm first generation, so I'm considered that. So it's just a slightly different face. And I do feel like it is very important to remember that and to put that sort of vision out there, and keep remembering that every battle that we fight and win here, it affects, and it needs to circle back to supporting the others that are being murdered at just as fast of a rate.
Appreciate that, Ndidi. Alexis, you had some thoughts.
When we had been at the protest, one of our biggest frustrations were that when we started chanting for the officers to kneel, two black men officers came and kneeled, and I mean, the press swarmed them. And it's funny because when I went back home, I saw it on Fox, and I was like, oh, hi. But me and Anthony were so irritated that we literally had to leave the group. We wanted to remove ourselves from that space because it was like, why are they being congratulated for what? What? For what? For doing the right thing? For standing up against people that are harming others? Doesn't that sound like the human thing to do? Aren't you a human? And so, for me, this whole thing is while it is very much Black Lives Matter, especially being a Black woman, it's a lot about humanity for me. I don't want to see a white person being killed unjustly. I don't want to see Asian people, being killed unjustly. I don't want to see any of it. I don't want it to happen. So to me, it's can we see this as humans? You as a white officer sitting down, you're saying you support Black lives. I want you to support human lives because you're a human when you take that badge off and you don't want to be killed unjustly. And I guess I don't understand how that concept isn't clear. We have a system that says you arrest them, you take them to jail, and then they decide. So how do you, as the police officer, as the individual, take that into your own hands to decide whether they deserve life or death when your job was just to take them to jail? So it just it's overall just frustrating why we congratulate them for doing the right thing right now. You should have been doing the right thing the whole time. That's your job.
Yeah, I hear that frustration. And, I know that this leads to this kind of other question, right? In this co-conspiratorship that Akeem has spoken to this idea that for us, it is important to think about how we mobilize towards this new vision of hope that you all have said in this conversation is important for you. And so, that's what I want to talk about is, do you all have ideas about how we can engage others in this conversation, right? We talked about the need to have representation for other voices that have not been lifted up, and indeed talked about it from the perspective of First Nation people. And so I'm curious to hear from anyone here who'd like to address this issue. I know it's something that Jenny talked about as well, but I know that she's kind of struggling with her sound. But I'd welcome the opportunity to go to her first to talk about how do we engage others in this conversation and make them a part of the process, so we're not othering people in this effort to eradicate oppression.
So first, I'm so inspired, and I love hearing the voices of Alexis and Miriam and Laura and Ndidi, and of course Dr. Akeem. But I want to start by just lifting up two Native women who were killed in police custody, Sarah Lee Circlebear and Andrea Circlebear, because yes, their voices have been relatively silent. We haven't really talked about the murder of Indigenous people in this country. As a person with Black and Indigenous roots, Caribbean roots, that really speaks to me. I think in hearing all of this, I love Akeem's new designation of co-conspirator opposed to ally. I love that. I'm going to take that. That's what I'm going to run with. In this particular struggle, I'm just going to say it. White people have power. As many of us as there are in terms of people of color, we do not have power within these institutional systems. And people are repeatedly saying the system is broken. The system is broken. No, the system is not broken. The system is operating exactly as it was designed to work, and that is to oppress us. Common day policing comes out of the tradition and the history of runaway slave patrols. We have to just say that, and we have to acknowledge that. We have a system that works very well in keeping us locked in step and keeping us very confused and feeling immobilized. And so absent a complete dismantling of that particular system, we do need those co-conspirators, because some of them have access to power. And Zaid and I have been friends now for 12, 13 years. And one of the first conversations that we had everything to do with the fact that I, as a political science professor and as a government administrator with a now 17-year history of being a government administrator, my word to him was, when you're out fighting on the street, I will open the window for you in these institutions, in these hallowed halls. I will open the door for you. I will let you know when I need you to show up and shake the hell out of that fence. And so you do need those co-conspirators, whether they're of color or whether they're, absent of color, right? It's I think it's incumbent on us to collectively sort of work together for those of us that are like-minded to really be able to push that system forward and to cause it to change and ultimately to cause it to collapse and rebuilding in a way that we see fit as people that really just have humanity at our core. And again, I don't think that it's one group's responsibility to force that change. It's a collective, group of like-minded people who say, yes, this shit is broken. Sorry, I know there's kids on there, but yes, this is broken, and we need to be able to move this forward.
Thank you for that, Jenny. Anthony, with your hand up, is there something that you wanted to say in this regard? Oh no, I see Jerona though. Okay, Jerona, the floor is yours.
No, thank you for that, Jenny. I agree 100%. And honestly, that is one thing that has been on heavily on my mind is, like I mentioned earlier, like you see these big corporations speaking out against racism, and they commit to doing what they can within their organizations to fight against it and make change. And my thing that's been heavy on my mind is, okay, so what do I do to make them accountable for what they said? And how do I do work to say, okay, you committed to fighting racism, making change, what can we do together to make sure that happens? And my my company, actually, where there are I can count on one hand how many Blacks are in my company. And we went dark Tuesday, but we had an open forum Zoom call for anyone that wanted to call in, and I did call in, and I was only Black on the call, and I opened up my heart, and had cried quite a few tears on that call. But I will say that we talked about, because I work for a very popular animation company. And we talked on that call, how do we use our platform of content and entertainment to make change? And I tell you, that actually really, really touched my heart, because I was like, okay, the people, at least on this call, in this company, are serious about doing something. So I was like, okay, so how do we go to, just because I'm thinking of what they wrote, Ben and Jerry's. You had a very powerful statement. You said, you used some words and language that corporations would have never thought to use 30 years ago in making a statement. Great, Ben and Jerry's. And I'll be honest, I thought Ben and Jerry's was one of the whitest companies in America. I was like, wow. So, so I was like, okay, so what do I do to reach Ben and Jerry and say, hey, you've got power, you've got money, you've got reach. Help us. Let's do this. Let's change laws. Let's get people voting. Let's get these just city and state government people who are like oppressing us, keeping us down, and not doing a damn thing to help us. Let's do this together. So I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional, but that's been on my mind. Is like, what am I supposed to do to reach these people that I know have the power to help us and to change us and to stop it? Just stop it. I'm so sorry, you guys, but I think about my son every time he walks out that door, and I'm like, please don't let him run into a racist cop or a racist individual that thinks it's a crime to be Black in America, because then that's the last time I want to say I love you to my kid. I cannot have that. I cannot. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No apology necessary.
Don't be sorry.
Yeah, this is not a space for apologizing for your experience. This is a place in which we celebrate the diversity of who we are as a people. And so, you were brought on specifically because you're a mother who had a lived experience in foster care, and because that's something that my mom had, because the impact it's had on me. I'm obviously a Black man, and it's something that Akeem has already spoken to in terms of my experience when I walk out the door, even as someone who's a community leader and a community activist, right? Still take on this mantle of concern and fear And I recognize that for some people, you can opt into the feeling of experiencing fear. But for many of us, fear is our way of life. And so that's something that we need to move to change. And it takes testimonials from folks like you to help us get there. And I know Alexis had something that kind of resonated with her in terms of what you said. And so I know she had raised her hand. So I want to go to you so you can speak.
I'm worried, Jerona, but I guess it's part me just coming out of school and being someone who is very involved in seeing how businesses get your money. I'm worried that a lot of these businesses and corporations are using this as a marketing scheme. And I'm worried that they're not going to put their money where their mouth is. I'm worried that this $1 billion won't really go to my community or the community of Indigenous people or the communities that need it. I'm worried that they're going to go back into these systems that don't have our voices in it, that can't tell them how to change. So I guess my thing is like, how do we ensure that there are voices up there that want to work for us, and it's not just like money being recirculated without our ideas. I don't want someone else to write our story again. If they are going to do these things, let us lead it, because otherwise I don't really care. It's not going to really help me if we aren't the ones leading how this change should happen.
Thanks for that perspective. Ndidi, I think you had your hand up, and I want to pose this question to the panel as we move forward, because Jerona asked it specifically, so I want to re-articulate it, which is, Los Angeles, the city that we're in, is one of the most diverse places in the world, excuse me. And it's also a media hub in which kind of narratives and content is created and imagery is sent across the globe that is representative of populations, right? And some of those populations have these stereotypical images that create a framework for people to have negative perceptions or ideas. And so, it sounds like the question that Jerona was posing, which I want to pose to everyone else, is there an opportunity for us to use content and media to set a new human rights agenda, to create a new paradigm for people to see the experiences of folks of color in a new light, and to build an authentic perspective that allows folks to engage in a way that has a positive impact on our communities? So I'm posing that question. I know Ndidi had something else that maybe she wanted to chat about. So, we can go to her, and then anyone else who'd like to answer that question. I see Akeem. We can follow up there.
Jerona, I feel your frustration. And as annoying as this is, but much like what Jenny says, it gets distilled down to community, and it gets distilled down to the power we have within, and it starts on municipal levels. Yes, those big corporations, you're already in the door in one massive aspect of media animation that's huge, and you're already starting to take the steps, and that's the micro. And each step you take is working towards the bigger thing. And I think that I personally suffer with I get frustrated because I want to see movement now, and I often feel very powerless. And living in the United States as an immigrant, I am very powerless in terms of what I can physically do. I don't have the most important right that everyone here has, and that's the right to vote. And I think that what people forget, and it's the same thing where I'm from, and I do work in the municipal government community, is you have to look at how this situation is run in tiers. And the one that directly affects us first, most intensely, is municipal. And I don't think, and I've seen it happen here, there's random elections, and I'm always like, who are these people? And I start doing research to tell my husband, who's American, like, this is who you got to vote. And I'm losing my mind because it's very sporadic, and they do this so that we are not aware of what's happening, so that a small percentage of oppressive people, more often than not, let's be real, get these positions, and they keep staying within the city councils, and they pass bylaws and laws which directly continue the system of oppression. So we have to start by being aware of that stage and being as active as we can in ensuring that we get candidates that represent us actually on the municipal level. And then you go to state, and then you go to federal. But I always think micro, and I've had to do this because that was even in Canada, that's the only place where I felt I could really control and I could really shift. Because through who I was having represent me in my municipal government, I could then start to see who was aligned with those people on my provincial, and the provincial is directly affected how my care experience was, because social services is state provincially run. And so I always sort of looked at, this is the point where I have power, and it exists when you work for studios or corporations. There's always tiers, and you have to look to the direct tier you can access and start to make your steps and start to align. And I really think that, Drona, you're doing it. Jenny, you're doing it. But we always have to circle back to that, is how do we get more of the youth that have this power, the future, to remember you have to start at municipal. You have to remember who's representing you and not get swayed by it, because it can be very daunting. And I believe it's designed that way, so that we don't let our voices be properly used. So step one is micro municipal governments, first tiers, and in companies that you're affiliated with, and starting there.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Indy. Going over to Anthony and then Dr. Akeem.
I feel a lot of these corporations are, making statements, doing these things just to, make sure that they keep their customers, make sure that, they don't get canceled. Because, and I just feel like I'm tired of reading statements. I'm tired of getting sent statements. Being a university student and also working on the campus as well, I have received so many statements in the past week, and I haven't had it up to here with all these statements. I'm tired of hearing that you feel bad for me. I'm tired of all that. Like, get out and do something. And it's like, at the same time, like, why does it take for, a man being murdered in the street like a dog for you to have to, donate to this organization? Why does it take this long? Why does it take for, stuff? Ooh, for the curse, I have to remember there's children here. Why does it take for stuff to hit the fan for you to want to make it, for you to want to, donate and, help out? Like, you should already been doing this. And I'm an event planner for the university as well. We went black. We halted all of our events until further notice. And we went black on Tuesday as well. And then we had a town hall, basically a town hall, just in our department. And they were like, how can we reflect, people of color, and how can we do all this? They want to kind of just like throw all of our events away and just kind of make them to where like they're just black, and it's like, just circled around people of color and blackness. Is just like, why are we doing this now? Like, why? It just doesn't seem right to me. And it seems kind of just tone deaf to just, try to fix everything, try to just circulate everything just around, people of color, like, because stuff is happening. Like, we're either going to do it or we're not going to do it. Like, I was having a conversation last night. Like, if you're going to be racist, I would appreciate it if you just blatantly, just full on, just throw it at me. I don't want you to be undercover about it. Just throw it at me so I know. Because that's the worst type of racist, the ones you don't know about. The ones who are sitting up there geeking with you, and at the same time, they're sitting up here voting for Trump and putting this money into these corporations that don't support you.
I'm not even gonna let Zaid tell me to go. But it's funny.
Even your turn, girl.
Sorry. Now I'm sending us statements, and it's like, I guess for me, I don't want your statement. I want you to look at your organization and see how you oppress people of color. See how many people you have people of color in your organization, and how many you don't hire, and how many times your boss says microaggressions. Like, those are the changes I want you to work on. Stop sending me statements and telling me how you stand with me. That's not what I want you to do.
Y'all youngins, so impatient. For me, there's a few things. Generally speaking, there is no such thing as a white person who is not racist. If we think about the context of capitalism, independent ownership of wealth, ownership of land, right? The reason why they were able to take the land is because people who were here were like, own the land, you're crazy, the land owns you. And so this idea of being able to build, maintain an enormous amount of wealth off of the backs of Black, Brown, Indigenous, First Nation, and other people of color is inherently racist. And then the idea that you're going to make this money off of my back and then donate some back to me? Right? I'm like, no, you like the fact that you have trillions of dollars, and they're going to give me, give my community 10 million. Oh, thank you so much. Right. And we're supposed to kowtow and be thankful. So for me, I'm like, no, that's racist, oppressive, and there is no line, right? Like I say all the time, there's no such thing as being somewhat racist. You either are or you are not. And to perpetuate capitalism is to perpetuate racism. And so the question about how do you kind of use media to change the narrative in this paradigm, the challenge is media is just one cog in the racist capitalist system. Media ain't there just to like make everybody feel good. Media is there, and most of these companies are publicly traded, meaning people are making money off of the ads and things you're being sold. So media is a part of the racist oppressive system. So, like, can I use media to change the narrative? I mean, we can try to sway public opinion from one day to the next, right? If we come back to this idea of how media changes things, if we think about it was decades, literally for decades leading up to the 1960s, Black people were being slaughtered, right, at the hands of racist folks down south, Jim Crow, segregation, right, lynching. It wasn't until television, which was an advent of the late 50s. And now it was like, you're not just listening to it on the radio, but you saw people being hosed down live at the dinner table. And so it can sway kind of public opinion, right? Did racism go away because Jim Crow went away? No. And so my point is like media can like sway things. More so it will sway how things look. It will sway how things are operationalized, but it will not inherently change the fundamental system that is racist, oppressive, and dare I say once again, a fascist regime, right? If you have people who call the military, because National Guard is a military, not just like some advanced security, they are trained military. There are people in the National Guard in Afghanistan. And so if you have a mayor, a governor, a president who call the military, who squash kind of folks who are speaking out against political violence, that's fascism, textbook, right? And so if we want to talk about how do you combat that, well, it's like, all right, well, let's call it what it is. Let's be willing to say and speak the uncomfortable truths, right? The truths to the power, the truth to our neighbors. And then we can think through, well, what role does media play? But is it really going to change our daily experience? Like, who knows, right? Like, there's like the idea like 80% of folks who control what gets played on television are white men. So it's just like, I don't know if we're really going to change the narrative through media. And this is coming from someone who does research on changing the narrative. So yeah, I think all folks who are white are racist, and I could say that, and I will stand firmly by it. And racism does not mean that you go out and kill Black people. Racism does not mean you say nigger. Racism does not mean that you do all of those things overtly. Racism is inherent in practice, right? It's just like, who are your friends? You say, I have a Black best friend, racist. When you watch children being taken into foster care and not stepping up to create systems that help children thrive, when all of those children are overwhelmingly Black and brown, racist. And so we have to really think about what racist means. It's not just about who said the N-word and who shot whom. It's how are the systems really being implemented, and then think through that paradigm and think through how you undo that, before we can think through what the media campaign is.
Thank you for that feedback, Dr. Akeem. I know that has given people some energy, and there's some words that want to follow in light of what you just shared. And so I want to go to Jerona, and I'm curious if there's anyone else here who'd like to follow up Akeem's commentary.
As much as white people really think in their heart that they don't want to be racist, but like you said, it's a generational systemic thing that is just been, and people, I don't even think they realize they are, you know. And so, because I've had people tell me, "Oh yeah, I have Black friends," and then I'll say, "Well, yeah, how many times they been to your house for dinner?" And then it'll just be like, "Oh, I don't think I've had them at," So I think people in their heart don't want to be, but I will say that I have had some friends who said that they have really been taking a look within to try to figure out where they are and how they do express racism without realizing it, and I'm really surprised at what they're finding out about themselves, and that's part of my hopefulness, right? That we're gonna see some kind of shift somehow, some way.
Thank you for that. Anthony.
I agree with President Akeem. Um, I, I just want to add on to you were going on what's racist. I've been seeing a lot on the internet, white people misusing the Black Lives Matter hashtag. Like they'll post pictures with their Black friends and just Black Lives Matter. That's a misuse of the hashtag, and that's not standing in solidarity with the movement. You look foolish. You look foolish when you do that, and it upsets me. And Jerona, I have a large variety of white people in my life, and I think I have white people. They don't really they really do just have to look in with themselves right now. They don't they may not think yeah, I support Black people, I support the movement, but you do little microaggressions that you may not see it as a big thing. You may not see it as something that's super racist, but I know I'm looking very deep into things. I look very deep into things, and I think everybody in this panel does as well. And it's racist. You may not think it, but you just really have to think critically about what you do, what you say when it comes to super sensitive topics like this. Child, everybody is not quote unquote woke like they say they are.
Go ahead, Alexa.
Did you have something to say?
Always. I'm over here enjoying it. First of all, can I say to Ben and Jerry's, I'm waiting for you to say, I have the F the police flavor with blueberries, and 100% of the proceeds go to Peace for Kids. That's what I'm going to need you to do.
Thank you.
So I agree. I'm just agreeing with everybody. I'm sitting here super jazzed, super excited. One of the reasons why I chose to become a political science professor was because I knew that as people of color, we were intentionally left out of the understanding of how the system works, and therefore things like us voting, where the real power lies in these structures, were something that we just didn't even pay attention to. And so, even though I've received criticism from my own, peers and so-called friends and people that I've encountered over my life, other people of color who were maybe more radical or saw themselves as more progressive than me and saying, well, you're kind of a sub. You work for the government and you teach at a college. To me, being a professor and standing in front of a class, and Dr. Akeem had, graced me with his presence, being one of my interns while he was going through his doctorate program. We're doing something very radical because we're informing people and we're changing things. And yet, I just want to throw out there, only 10% of faculty in the California community colleges are people of color. When I graduated from graduate school, almost 20 years ago, I was the only person of color that was a female in my graduating class. And so changing those things are really key. And I saw in the comments, someone said, what can we do to, I think it was from whoever's handling everything. Maybe it's, I don't know who it is. Anyway, so, they asked, what can we do as people of color to get kids engaged? I run programs within the county of Los Angeles that bring in hundreds of kids every year to say, maybe being in civil service would be a path that you would choose, where you can really implement, elements of change within whatever it is that you're doing within your own operations. And so I think, that's an important component of the discussion too, is we have to not only sort of be on the outside demanding change. We have to be in positions where we can actually begin to push for that change and see it realized. And so, that's something that I think I feel really strongly about. And that might be a very different sort of sentiment, but I think, I wanted to share that and just kind of throw that out.
Appreciate that, Jenny. Appreciate that perspective from someone who has worked in systems a long time. We're going to give the floor to Alexis, and then I'm going to ask my last question because I want to be respectful of the time, because we're about 15 minutes away from when we said this particular conversation would end, and then we would go into a 12 o'clock discussion with the group. So I'm going to give the floor to you, Alexis, and then I'll ask my last question.
I think I kind of wanted to piggyback off of something that Anthony said about, Anna King said about people kind of asking, reaching out and saying, how can I be an ally? And it's like, I have a lot of others and white people in my life, and I don't necessarily look at them as, I know they're white, but I don't see things like that, because I'm a very open person. But I feel like if you have to come to me and ask me if your actions are racist or not, that is telling. Because I didn't even question it before you brought it to the table. So when you are walking down the street and you see a man and you grab your purse, are you grabbing it because he's black, or are you grabbing it because he's a man? And that's something you have to think about within yourself. And that shouldn't be something that I should teach you or help you learn or help you figure it out. That is something you've been taught. That's something that you've decided that you wanted to take with you. So you are racist. You have racist, at least, beings in you. Maybe you don't oppress people, but you definitely help, what do you say? How do you say it? Push stereotypes forward, which oppresses us, because you aren't choosing to break stereotypes or prejudice thinking. Second of all, I think that I've focused a lot on, I think a lot of the conversation is how do we, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And for me, I think as I continue to grow and learn and decide how I want to be an activist, for me, it's really making sure that I am staying true to my community and continuing to bring back everything that I am learning and back to them so that they are informed, so that they can no longer say we didn't know. Because I feel like when I was a young child, I was exposed to so many things through Peace for Kids that no one around me knew. And I was like, dang, how do I get them to know that? So if the question is, how do we get more young people involved in politics and things like that, I think it's having young voices be relatable to them. Because I wasn't necessarily listening when I heard Zaid talking, but I maybe was listening when I heard Akeem talking. And that's not, it's just saying generationally, it just sometimes works like that. And just like now, I'm sure more people are listening, some young women are listening to me versus if they were going to listen to my grandma, because it just kind of is what it is. But I didn't see faces like me. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that statement, Alexis. And I've known a long time I'm the old man in the crew. Y'all weren't listening, and it's all good. But I also see that you guys have stepped up in phenomenal ways, right? So I get to sit here and just listen to you all have a dialogue. And, I know for both Jenny and I, it's like seeing many us is really activating your energy and your spirit and your resolve. And that's something that is powerful, because I think, to your point, that's the goal of this conversation. The goal is healing and transformation, and that always starts from within. That is not something that we can expect someone outside of us, meaning our community, to begin to do. And so as we take more ownership and we encourage other people to take ownership on themselves, then we can move this forward a little bit. And I also want to talk a little bit in my last question about what is somewhat implicit in what y'all have shared, which is that there's this kind of coded language and microaggressions that happen to us as a people. And Alexis, you were speaking to that in the way that people behave when there's someone of color that walks into a room, or an experience that they have in an isolated space with someone, a person of color. And so I want to talk about that as my last question, which is, what do you all think about the different microaggressions that maybe are even happening in this moment? I know specifically we've talked a little bit about how they're framing the word riot when they're speaking to the protesters and the experiences that are happening on the street. So I wonder if anyone here wants to speak to some of the microaggressions that are happening in our world today to even diminish this moment in the minds of the experience of our people. And I see Dr. Akeen's hand went up real big in the camera, so I'm gonna give him the floor, and then we'll let other folks follow up.
Old man. It's I think it's like the phrase of the day. It's racist, right? It's racist. Play the race card, but it is right. So if we think about like the idea of any revolutionary moment, is like this idea of like folks probably have heard of the idea of the shot heard around the world, right? It's like the bullet, the one shot that started the American Revolution. It's like, okay, well, this is going to be the window breaking heard around the world. This is going to be the building burning, like seen around the world. And this idea that, like, even if we think back, being in Los Angeles, we think about 1965. I call it like the LA uprising. I call '92 the Watch Rebellion because we weren't. It wasn't a riot. It was like, yo, we are fed up. Capitalism is racist, so burning down a building is burning down racism, right? So if you look at it from that paradigm, it's a much different experience, right? It's literally 3-4 weeks ago, you had armed white men storm a state capitol. Like, where was the National Guard to protect the state capitol? It was like, oh no, they were just, upset with all that's going on, aka not being able to go outside. Boo hoo. It's like we're being murdered in the street in cold blood. And when we get upset and throw a temper tantrum, it's like, oh no, you thugs. And so like the idea that like, it is a microaggression, right? Because microaggressions are just another, I say, softer way to talk about how racism is manifested, right? It's this idea that, we have to just be able to call things what it is. So, no, this is a civil unrest. This is an uprising. This is the beginning of hopefully what becomes a revolutionary moment. Coming back to what, you said earlier, Zaid, the idea is like, is this moment? Alexis, you talked about, we're not in the same moment we were in 50, 60, 100 years ago. And those moments only shifted when folks are unwilling to accept the things the way they are. And talking and kneeling doesn't do anything, right? So sure, you got cops to kneel with you. You think they're gonna be kneeling with you tomorrow when they pull you over on 405 northbound? No, they're gonna be telling you to shut up. So I think about like all of those things collectively are just like, again, manifestations of racism. So at home, you can say it with me. It's racist.
All right. I see Miriam and Laura. The floor is yours.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I got a text message from a caregiver in the middle of this, and I wanted to. It's why I got into the work with Peace for Kids, and it's why when I was in foster care, I was like, there's something wrong here. Like, I need to grow up and do something about this. And we have a 9-year-old questioning the system. There's something really wrong. And just in terms, piggybacking off of Akeen saying, yes, it is racist. It's also important to remember that when you have people going into these systems that work with children and have these implicit biases and have this inherent racism in them, and children are telling them stories that are true, and these people who are racist are the ones that are in charge of handling their cases or, making sure that they're safe. A lot of these children are now not having safety. And there are so many stories of positive stories of children in the foster care system. And I've met so many amazing caregivers. I don't want to discount that. And at the same time, in our case, rereading the police reports as an adult and everything that they had written on there, if someone had listened to our story, if someone had actually read our story and not called us liars, we probably would have been safe. And that was not what happened to us. They didn't listen to us. They didn't read our reports. Therefore, we were abused for 10 more years of our lives. And that hurts me. It hurts me so much. And it hurts me to think and to know that this is probably still happening to so many children. So it's important to also just in thinking back about the community that we work with, that all of this ends up ultimately affecting our youth. and that we have to step up and we have to really advocate for them, and we have to put our egos to the side. And if some feelings are hurt today, like, that's okay, because it's not about you. It's about the children, and it's about the future generations. It's about those that are most at risk for this violence. And definitely, like, think about that always. And again, if your ego is hurt, and if you are hurt by being called a racist, or like you believe in capitalism and that makes you racist, like, put it to the side, because if you really care about this community so much, you're going to care enough to know that it doesn't matter, because there are children's lives who are at risk because of all of this. Great.
I appreciate that. I want to, Ndidi, I see your hand, and so I want to give you the floor, but I also know Dr. Akeem has to log off because there's a rally happening across from him in City Hall, which he would like to engage in and take his family to participate in. So we want to give you the space, but we also want to just take a moment to say thank you, brother, for joining and offering your insight and perspective. All right, Ndidi.
I mean, I guess I'm the queen of circling back. I just wanted to sort of piggyback off of what Miriam had said, and just sort of say, all of us in this town hall, all of us in this community, it can feel very oppressive and frustrating and powerless right now. But just all of us being present and speaking our truths and continuing this dialogue and continuing this work is actively creating a better space and actively dismantling the systems that oppress us. Part of my story in being in care, at one point in time, I had a stepfather for a bit, and he was an RCMP, which is a top cop in Canada. And I was being abused. And every time somebody would notice, it was a teacher that would notice. So they need all that funding, not the police. They would take me out, but because he was in this position of power and he was a very racist white man, they would put me back in the house. And it's much like what you were saying. It's not that they didn't believe me, but when this person was in a position of power in the police force, in charge of looking at reports, it was too scary for them. They weren't willing to step up to protect me. And, just the fact that you're in these positions, Jenny, where the work that you're doing, it's just one step in protecting the kids that we once were. Because yes, it's still happening. I do know within my care experience ended up being the best experience of my life. So I was very, very fortunate. And one of the beautiful things that came out of it is the family that became my family. They worked in the care system on a provincial level. So I got to learn a bunch of things as a kid, as a teenager. So I'm able to go in to the community in a certain way and help to try and prevent things like what happened to us from happening. And that's what we all do here. Like, every time we're with the community, we're empowering these youth and we're giving them the keys to make it through difficult times that we all understand. So we're helping create a future that will dismantle the system as fast as it can be dismantled. But it is a long game. So, I guess I'm just trying to rah at the end, but just to say that just being present, sharing experiences, and having a bit of hope around them is dismantling the oppression as much as we can. So never lose sight of what we're all doing, no matter what.
I know a lot of our conversation is talking about like kind of dismantling a system that has oppressed us, but I also kind of want us to maybe think about how we in our community can maybe lift our own morale, because I do understand that sometimes I want our community to believe in itself and see the potential that they do have as individuals. And that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, you're going to change the world, but you aren't a criminal. You aren't broken. I always tell myself every day that, I'm not broken. God's making stained glass. But I see a lot of people in my community that decides that this brokenness is what they're going to carry out their life, and they're no longer anything but being broken. So I just want to somehow see if we can lift the morale of our communities as well, and uplift them and help them feel empowered so that they feel comfortable going into spaces and wanting to be politicians and scientists and and whatever it is on the scale versus saying, hey, I'm not good enough to even aspire to be those things. And I know that, it is a systematic oppression, but I want to see if maybe there's little things we can do in our community that just lifts those morales so that it isn't all on them to help us come back up.
I take that, Alexis. We'll give Anthony the last word, and then I'll have just some closing statements so that we can end on time.
To piggyback off Alexis, I mean, look at this. Look at your screen. Look at these squares. We're starting it right here, right now. This, this right here is just, this is going to give us this opportunity. When we share this with our youth, it's going to give them the opportunity to see. Look at all these people. Look at all these folks standing up for me, talking about what's going on. This right here is a stepping stone to building that. Making sure that people in our community just uplift themselves and stay true to themselves and not really see themselves as broken and see themselves as stained glass and really realize that your past makes your future, and how you how you choose to take what happened in your past, how that affects your future. If I'm making sense. Okay. And then that's what I had to say. But if I'm getting the last word, everyone in this freaking squares, in this chat, all 104 of y'all, make sure y'all go out and vote. Vote, y'all. Vote. This is how we're going to get where we want to get. Vote. Do not wait till the last minute, because I know, y'all know, that's what they do. They wait, they don't put all these polls, they don't open all these polling places, and you wait till the last minute, you're in that line, and it gets discouraging because you've been there for hours. Make sure you mail in that ballot beforehand. Make sure you go beforehand. Get out and vote. Mic drop.
Thank you for that perspective, Brother Anthony. And so I just want to lift up, I took some notes about things that have been said that were opportunities, and I also want to lift up some activities that, the young people in our community are already engaging in, so that folks get a sense of where they might be able to jump in and support. The first thing you highlighted it, Anthony, is the power in the vote, and to really look locally at what's happening in your own community, and to begin there, look at your municipality, begin to focus on those elections, begin to focus on, even though it's hard to figure it out, who the judges are that are making decisions in your criminal courts, right? Because those are people going to make decisions about generally people of color, in the way that they are kind of punitively and penalized for things that are happening in their community. And then the other thing that I heard that Jenny mentioned is this idea of preparing communities to be in spaces where the ivory tower is then populated with folks who have these lived experiences, right? Jenny is one of the few people who has a foster care experience that is an administrator for our local Department of Children and Family Services. And the same as Jerona spoke to, being in kind of the media sector and figuring out how do we hold these kind of companies accountable for hiring people who have a diverse amount of experience to begin to populate these opportunities for those that we serve. And then, Alexis spoke to this idea of really building up the youth voice. I want to be honest in the fact that what is missing from this conversation are young people under the age of 18. Those young people are not here, so we have not heard their voice. But we have been talking about how to encourage, even in the age of COVID, their participation. So Miriam is working to create something that was going to extend this concept of the sanctuary. She's going to be bringing artists in to get our young people to start creating protest art. And that protest art will be pasted around the city. Her sister, Laura, is a phenomenal artist, so she'll be participating in this exercise with her to help create this content, so that the stories and perspectives of our youth are then populating the city with this other idea. So if you're an artist who's on right now, if you're someone who has a talent from being an artist that is engaged in mixed media, someone that's doing film, someone that does photography, whatever that is, please reach out and let us know so that you can participate in the sanctuary with us as we have our young people kind of come together to process this moment and begin to create their protest art that we will share. And I also want to acknowledge Ndidi, who has a phenomenal voice and is our resident musician and artist. And she is committed to also helping our young people in the discovery of their talents by creating music with them. So we have this diverse group of folks who have the lived experience and have all these gifts that are making contributions to eradicating the limitations that oppression has for us as a collective people, and to also atone for our rights as humans to exist in the fullness of our expression. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening, again, lifting that up. And although Dr. Akeen is not here, I also want to acknowledge that on Juneteenth, there's going to be a celebration for the launch of his network called Altura. Altura is a network that is designed for young leaders who are here today, who are coming out of foster care, but also have earned their degree, represent a very small percentage of the foster care population. So he's built a network that is designed specifically for those folks who had a care experience and have also earned a degree, so that those folks can begin to band together to talk about how they can create societal change, having had the care experience as well. So once again, the link is in there for the FAM Circle. Sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but we will get to those when we get together in the FAM Circle at 12 noon. We appreciate you. We're thankful for you. We know that you showed up to be here today on your own time, and it was a lengthy conversation, but thank you for making the space for our young people to be heard. Bye.